In 1959, the Italian company SOS introduced an analog decompression meter to the market. This device, with its cumbersome name, was designed to automatically determine the necessary decompression during a dive. The mechanism is based on a simple bourdon tube connected to a compressible plastic pocket hidden inside a stainless steel housing. Under pressure, the gases inside this pocket are compressed and pass through the bourdon tube via a ceramic, whose porosity is supposed to replicate the saturation rate of a compartment in the Haldane model. We are talking about a single compartment here. However, it is well known at the time that attempts to reduce the number of compartments had all resulted in failures. But this is not the only issue with this curious device. During the dive, the gas in the pocket gradually migrates into the bourdon tube. After some time, the needle indicates a decompression stage. During ascent, the phenomenon reverses. The pressure of the gas in the bourdon tube becomes higher than the pressure in the pocket. The gas moves in the opposite direction at the rate imposed by the ceramic. The needle drops. This operation is perfectly consistent with Haldane theory. The porosity of the ceramic is the same regardless of the direction of the gas flow, so the saturation and desaturation rates are likely to be symmetrical. However, the transfer of gas through the ceramic probably follows a linear law rather than an exponential one. Additionally, the pressure of the gas in the pocket necessarily depends on the temperature. The main issue isn't there. The real difficulties arise with repetitive dives. After the first dive, the pressure in the bourdon tube is still higher than in the pocket. The needle hasn't returned to zero. At the surface, the rate of gas transfer depends on the difference between the pressure in the bourdon tube and the atmospheric pressure. This corresponds to nitrogen elimination at the surface for a single compartment. And it remains a single compartment because the porosity of the ceramic can only correspond to a single period. The choice of the ceramic is therefore crucial, but we are faced with a real dilemma. Either the porosity corresponds to a slow compartment period, and we end up with endless decompression stops on the first dive, without being sure that we have adequate decompression for the second one. Or the ceramic is chosen to represent a fast compartment, and the needle will return to zero after a few hours at the surface. Carl Edmonds is an Australian doctor, head of the Hyperbaric Centre in Sydney. A former officer, he led the Navy's underwater medicine school and was one of the founders of the Pacific South Hyperbaric Medical Society. The number of DCS he observes in divers using the SOS decompression meter raises his concern. He launches a testing campaign and compares the behavior of the machine, which is suspect of malfunctioning, with the US Navy tables, which were still a reference at the time. The first conclusions are published in the Journal of the Pacific South Medicine Society in 1973, and the least one can say is that Carl doesn't mind his words. He declares himself astonished at how blindly divers trust a mechanical gadget. He adds, it only takes someone to publish anything in a diving magazine for credulous divers to accept every word as gospel. His recommendations are clear. He strongly advises against using the SOS decompression meter beyond a certain depth, and particularly for repetitive dives. This does not prevent many manufacturers from distributing this product in various versions. The number of DCS becomes increasingly hard to deny, to the point that in the United States, divers nickname the machine the Bendomatic. The SOS company in Italy tries to save its image and elude the issue by adding a dial to adjust the surface interval, but the damage is already done. The reputation of automatic decompression meters, which some thought were revolutionary, becomes so widely known that the very serious Journal of the Pacific South Medicine Society publishes on the cover of the September 1987 issue a humorous drawing that perfectly summarizes the SOS affair. One might think that the SOS experience at least had the merit of raising awareness, but a new case will fuel the controversy. We find Carl Edmonds again in 1987. He reports in the Journal of the Pacific South Medicine Society the case of a diver who suffered a decompression sickness after a repetitive dive, using one of the precursors to our current dive computers to determine her decompression. Manufactured in the United States by Orca Industries and sold since 1983, the Edge is the first computer based on an algorithm that allows for continuous calculation of saturation and desaturation during a dive. Edmonds proposes 4 hypotheses to explain the accident of this unfortunate diver: a rare occurrence related to the fallibility of the tables, a misinterpretation of the data displayed by the computer, a defect in the computer, or a decompression protocol that was too risky. As with decompression meters, Edmonds evaluated the behavior of the dive computer in question. Initially, he refers to the manual, in which the manufacturer suggests to the user to add a safety factor, for example by keeping a 5 or 10-minute margin before mandatory stops. He does not hesitate to assert that Orca Industries is trying to minimize his responsibility by emphasizing the importance of planning dives or having a backup method to determine decompression. Once again, his conclusion is crystal clear. The Edge computer cannot be considered safe or even acceptable for repetitive dives when its operation is compared to the US Navy or Australian Royal Navy tables. The issue of repetitive dives is again raised the following year at the Dive Computer Workshop organized by the American Academy of Underwater Science. Paul Enmeiler from Orca Industries attempts to respond to the criticism. He presents a tortuous argument based on the number of dives reported on warranty cards, possibly returned by buyers. By referring to a study presented at the annual UHMS conference, which lists the number of accidents involving the use of dive computer, he tries to demonstrate that the Edge causes fewer accidents than the US Navy tables. During the subsequent roundtable, Edmonds shares his perspective, still sharp as ever. He admits that many divers have had decompression sickness using the US Navy tables. He then claims that dive computer impose less decompression for repetitive dives when compared to the tables. He ends with a question: how can a dive computer be considered safe under these conditions? He emphasizes that he does not understand how advertising can claim that a dive computer is always safer than the US Navy tables when it consistently suggests shorter decompression times. He will never receive an answer. Compared to the US Navy tables or the Royal Navy tables, the Edge computer cannot be considered safe whether for square or multi-level dives.